Sidney Powell has been in the news lately with a case a little bit too familiar. On the brink of expulsion from her college, she didn't want her mother to find out. So her solution was allegedly to kill her. Now, I technically don't have to say allegedly because she was convicted. But, of course, we need to go into the courtroom and see exactly what happened. I'd love to give you more details, but if you're familiar with the court process, that is exactly what the opening statements are for. The prosecution, who is, for the state, they are arguing by any means necessary to tell a story of why Sidney Powell should go to jail. The defense, they are arguing by any means necessary to explain why it's not her fault. I'll let them take it away.
Thank you again, Your Honor. Throughout yesterday and during the voir dire process, each of you were presented with quite a bit of information.
Now, if you've been watching court cases for a while, you know that unfortunately, the trial isn't just always about the evidence, all the testimonies, everything. It's about telling a story. And cases where justice really prevails usually involve a powerful and passionate prosecutor. That's a big part of what we look for to appropriately tell the story of everything that happened. Let me look. Let's see. What do we have here?
You got to hear from the court about what the process itself is, and then you got to hear from the state and defense counsel about burdens, about evidence, about your role as jurors. And I can promise you that I'm not going to go over all of that again. But what I am going to ask from each of you is to draw on your memory.
Okay.
Something that Prosecutor Brian Stano talked about, and I can assure you, you're going to hear this over and over and over again throughout trial. And that it is the duty of the jury to listen to and weigh the evidence presented. And I want to take the briefest moment to talk about where evidence comes from. Because it doesn't come from this podium. It doesn't come from myself. It doesn't come from Prosecutor Brian Stano. It doesn't come from Attorney Don Malarczyk. The evidence is going to come from this witness box.
Oh, the witness. Oh.
Testifying it.
Basically, he's saying that they have some really strong witnesses. I'm curious what's in there, but so far, I really like that he's talking to the jury. Like, if you were sitting in the jury box, you might actually feel engaged. You feel like he's instructing you, like, this is how we do it. Here's what you should prepare for. And it doesn't come off too, in your face. It doesn't come off as manipulative. Sometimes when a prosecutor or a defense attorney is talking to the jury, it can be a little manipulative, but this feels honest, transparent. I'm open to listening. Taku, congratulations on your BOZE master's degree.
Present evidence through it. That's where the evidence comes from. And what our witnesses testify to, what evidence is presented through them, it's up to you.
We're going to have to check out the witnesses.
To give its attention, to give it its credibility, and to weigh it. And I know it sounds simple and maybe even confusing as to why we keep bringing up the importance of evidence. But I assure you, it's because the uniqueness of this case. Because you've learned yesterday generally what this case is about. But the actual core of this case comes down to one simple question. Whether or not the defendant, Miss Sidney Powell, was suffering from a severe mental disease, and because of that severe mental disease, could not understand the wrongfulness of her actions when she took the life of her mother, Brenda Powell.
Now, that is what the defense is going to hinge on. They claim that Sidney Powell is a schizophrenic, and it was undiagnosed for many years.
Now, I promise you, I don't mean to diminish or simplify the questions that are going to be presented to you, but you're quickly going to learn this is not a case about who did it. This is not a case about how it was done. This case will come down to this sole question, whether or not Miss Powell at the time of the murder was suffering from a severe mental disease which prevented her from knowing the wrongfulness of those actions. And although that sounds like a direct question, I want to stress to each of you, it's not as simple as reading a medical report. It's not as simple as listening to testimony from doctors. You are going to have to listen to all the evidence. You're going to have to weigh that evidence. And the state believes that when you hear that evidence, apply it to your role as a juror, you're going to be able to recognize that Miss Sidney Powell is responsible for the murder of her mother, Brenda, and she was not suffering from a severe mental illness or disease that prevented her from knowing the wrongfulness of what she did.
I don't know why people keep going for the by reason of insanity or mentally ill defense. Have you ever been in a mental hospital before? It is comedic how many people that were perfectly sane during their manipulative and brutal murder that end up actually being sent to a mental hospital, and then they get in there and they say, oh my God, these women are actually crazy, get me out of here. And then they want to go to jail. They'd rather go to jail or get out. Were there movies in the 90s that like made it a big deal of not guilty by reason of insanity? Like, do you know what you're doing? Like,
and my goal here this morning is to provide you a little bit more insight as to what the state believes the evidence is going to show.
Okay.
In December of 2019, Miss Powell was notified.
Now, wait. Like I said, the reason why I didn't brief you on the whole case before we hopped into this is because the purpose of the opening statement is to tell you everything. So we're going to let the pro sit here and guide you from what happened from 2019 when she was enrolled in college to her mother's murder.
In December of 2019, Miss Powell was notified of her dismissal from the University of Mount Union. Over the last few semesters, she was struggling academically. She was struggling with the concerns that college brings. And at some point, she was put on a probationary period. Unfortunately, that probation period did not turn out well for Miss Powell. And in December, she was notified by the University of Mount Union that she was going to be dismissed for the spring semester. She could reapply after that spring semester had finished. And Miss Powell herself was provided notice. She had to sign for that notice that this was happening. Now, Mount Union knew of her dismissal. Miss Powell knew of her dismissal. But everybody else in Miss Powell's life had no idea what was going on. Because Miss Powell hid that. She hid that from her friends, from her family. She hid that and lied to her parents, Stephen and Brenda.
It's almost like a Chandler Halderson case again, because I want to remind you, sure, we're watching the trial now, but Sidney Powell was convicted of killing her mother. I just have to say, I don't know, what is this, terror of letting your parents find out that you f***ed up in school? Jennifer Pan didn't want them to know. Chandler Halderson didn't want them to know. Me, I came home with a couple D's. I said, check it out, Mom. For me, that was a good little bit of attention. I said, look, I'm failing. I'm doing something bad. What are you gonna do about it? They did ultimately fix it. But I mean, I had strict parents too. I don't find this relatable. I do not find this relatable.
According to everybody else, Ms. Powell is still a student at Mount Union. Her grades were okay. Her scholarship was not at risk. She was doing fine. But in reality, things were much different for her. In January of 2020, Mount Union begins its spring semester. And here, Miss Powell returns to the university. She returns to campus. She returns to her dorm life. She moves back into her dorm with her roommate, Lauren Curry. She continues to engage in sorority life and programming, and she uses what the campus has to offer. The whole time, this lie is continuing. She's continuing to lie to her family that everything's normal. She's continuing to lie to her friends, even her roommate, that she's still going to class. And between January and the week of February 24th, the Mount Union Dean of Students Administration, John Frazier, Michelle Gaffney, you're going to hear from them.
Sorry, even her roommate? Can you imagine finding out that your roommate is lying about going to college and she keeps lying to your face and you're like, all right, Sydney, see you later. That would give me the creeps. Who does that?
They had to have meetings with Miss Powell to discuss her enrollment, or lack thereof, and to discuss that because she's not a student for this semester, she cannot be on campus. She cannot be in her dorm.
No.
But rather than fixing the problem, Miss Powell continued her lies, now to the administration.
This is kind of odd because it doesn't feel like just strict parents. She didn't want to tell her friends. She didn't want to tell her roommate. She wanted to, like, just act like this wasn't happening. Where was she going during this time?
She tells them, of course, I'll get this handled. I'll be out of my dorm.
Sorry.
But rather than fixing the problem, Miss Powell continued her lies, now to the administration. She tells them, of course, I'll get this handled. I'll be out of my dorm. Everything will be fine. But again and again, Miss Powell remained on campus. The administration offered to help Miss Powell. Do you want us to speak with your parents? Let them know what's going on. Another lie.
Ooh,
Miss
what?
Powell says, no, my parents are okay. They understand. I talked to them already.
No, you didn't.
In reality, nobody knows yet.
It feels like almost like emotional procrastination.
February 24th of 2020, Miss Powell does leave campus. And she discloses to her friends, her roommate, Miss Curry, those in her sorority, that her and her parents have agreed that it would be best for her to take some time away from university. That's another lie. Because although she tells that to her friends and her classmates, Mr. Powell and Miss Powell, Stephen and Brenda, they still don't know what's going on.
They still think she's going to class.
In fact, they think that Sydney's not going to return to their home here in Akron until spring break, the week of March 3rd. Now, Stephen and Brenda, they start to notice something. They start to kind of push on Sydney. They notice that she's home during the afternoons more here.
BOZE, I would say that for parents to use guilt as punishment and the child's worst fear of failing, and the guilt goes with not meeting expectations, especially if it feels like an obligation. That's awful. It's not a good idea for anybody. But while you're hearing this story, do you feel stress building with like every new lie that she's telling or every new denial of reality? I feel it. I feel a lot of stress. And so I can't imagine this stress boiling and building up in Sydney, which might explain why we, end with a rage, an explosion of temper.
They start to kind of push on Sydney. They notice that she's home during the afternoons more here in Akron when she should be in class. And they try to confront Sydney. But rather than receiving answers, once again they receive lies. Sydney, why are you home during the day? Oh, class was canceled. Oh, I have an excuse to not appear in class. Stephen Powell recognizes that his tuition that he pays to not still hasn't been withdrawn. Sydney, what's going on with the tuition? Don't worry, Dad. I'll get it handled on Monday. Still hiding the fact that she's not a student there at this time. Now, the state isn't going to pretend we don't understand that stress.
This is why some people don't lie, because when you lie, it builds an immense amount of stress. Like, it's now a thing that you have ball in the air that you have to keep up with. And perpetual liars, oh, they got 40 balls up there. They can't keep their story straight. But some of them, they just been lying so long that they're like, well, come what may. I'd rather get caught in a lie than get caught failing, which is a mentality that will not help you as an adult. Failure is a part of life. And personally, not to be corny, I think it's a great part of life. If it doesn't happen too often and you're not getting yelled at every time you fail, there's a lot to learn from it.
Every human being has been in a position where lies are a little bit heavy and you don't want to confront what's really going on, especially to your parents.
Oh, yeah.
And for an individual at Sydney's age, at Miss Powell's position in life, college can be a little bit overwhelming. We're not ignoring that. We're not ignoring the anxieties and the stress that comes with that. But these lies were built and controlled by Miss Powell. They were built upon each other, protecting herself and hiding her reality. And during the week of February 24th, after she's left campus, she knows she can't return home because spring break doesn't start until March 3rd.
Oh my God.
And so Miss Powell starts to continue to visit campus, staying with friends, staying at local hotels. But what she's doing is not returning home.
She's going to hotels.
To confront the reality that things were not as perfect as she told her parents. Miss Powell has conversations with her mom, Brenda, that she'll be home on March 3rd after class. Class would end around 2:30. She'd be home for spring break. And that night, March 2nd, she texts her former roommate, Lauren Curry. She asked to see if Lauren Curry would be okay if She came and watched The Bachelor with them and their friends. Something they did regularly. Monday night, Bachelor night. We all get together and we watch the show.
Oh my God.
On March 2nd, that's what Miss Powell did. She returned to Mount Union campus. She returned to the university to meet with her friend Lauren.
Oh my God. Sydney Powell has been kicked out of the school by this point, but she is still showing up to the house to go watch The Bachelor with her friends.
And she watched The Bachelor with her friends. Now, I think it's important to note, just briefly, that during the time of this, the Powell family used an app on their phones called Life 360.
Life 360?
An app that a lot of families use, especially families with children. It allows families to keep in touch, to make sure everybody's okay. Specifically allows you to let you know that the kids are where they need to be. And that comes into play on the morning of March 3rd. On the morning of March 3rd, Stephen Powell recognizes that the tuition still hasn't been taken out. So being a dad, he takes the effort to look through the website.
Oh! The tuition hasn't been taken out and he noticed!
Morning of March 3rd, Stephen Powell recognizes that the tuition still hasn't been taken out.
Oh my God. So the fact that Sydney's crying right here when he gets to the scariest part of the story, the moment that her dad realizes something's going on with the college. This is where Sydney starts shedding a lot of tears. She's breathing heavily. She's turning red. It's almost like she's reliving the moment that her father found out that something was up.
Dad, he takes the effort to try to work through Mount Union's website and figure out what's going on.
Oh my God.
And for the first time.
Oh my God.
For the first time
I'm feeling the stress.
Miss Powell returns from Mount Union to her home in Akron, to the family home.
Wait, I gotta say really quick, chat, we're 10 minutes in. What do you guys think of this prosecutor so far? I'll let you guys say it real quick. I think this dude's doing a great job. I'm hanging on every word. I feel the stress of her situation. Being a great prosecutor in a criminal trial, it involves a lot of storytelling, and I think he's doing a really great job. I'm all in. I'm all in. I have no idea how the defense is going to follow this up. Well, I do, and clearly it didn't work.
Now, Mr. Powell, recognizes this on the Life 360 app. Well, Sydney's home. It's the morning of March 3rd. She should be in class.
Oh my God.
Mr. Powell decides to drive home to the family home.
Oh my God.
But he decides to leave his phone at work.
Oh my God.
Because he knows if he's driving
home,
Miss Powell will see that Dad's on his way.
Phone games.
And he wants to confront Sydney. He wants to find out what's going on. And that's what happens.
Oh my God, oh my God.
He arrives home to their house in Akron. He meets with her, and this is where she discloses to her dad that she's struggling with school. That she doesn't like it. That she doesn't know if this is what she wants to study. And that Mount Union might not be the place for her. But she doesn't disclose the full story yet. Mr. Powell, being a dad, is concerned for his daughter. He knows the golden rule that if you put things off, it's just going to become worse.
Wow.
So he encourages her that he's going to contact her mom, Brenda.
No.
And they're going to figure this out.
Oh my God.
She's going to get it together. She's going to be back in class.
Oh my God.
She can take the summer off and work and take a break, but she needs to get back in class and she needs to turn this around.
I think it's interesting because, like, on one hand, I hear that they use the Life 360 app, which can be, they're really keeping track of their kids, I think it's odd that the dad tactically left the phone at work to trick his daughter. That's a little odd. But then I think it's interesting that he offered a lot of solutions. He believed what she said. He offered a lot of solutions of, hey, why don't you take a break? Why don't you go work here and do this for the summer? We'll talk to your mom and figure this out. Like, it doesn't seem very like, you haven't been going to school and you didn't tell me? What the f? Like, I don't know.
And he returns to work. Mr. Powell then contacts Brenda, his wife. He lets her know that Miss Powell is having some struggles with Mount Union enrollment. And he knows that Brenda, being a mom, is really good at this stuff. Brenda, can you help figure this out? What's going on?
She's crying more when they're talking about her mother, who she killed.
At Akron Children's, where she works as a child life specialist. She works with children and families of those dealing with health issues. She guides them through the health process.
Wait.
at Acton Children's, where she works as a child life specialist. She works with children and families of those dealing with health issues.
So Sidney Powell's mother, Brenda, works at a children's hospital dealing with children, like children that have health issues, and also helping the families that are dealing with these really difficult health issues cope with life. Probably the therapeutic aspect, the physical therapeutic aspect, and then also the mental aspect of it as well. That's her job.
She guides them through the health process. And Brenda leaves work to return home to help with the Mount Union enrollment issue.
And now she's coming to help her daughter.
She meets Miss Powell, Sidney Powell. We know that around 12 to 12:15, Miss Brenda Powell calls the University of Mount Union. She talks to Mount Union, but she leaves a voicemail or a message with the secretary of the dean of students.
As you're watching this, I want you to take some notes on what you think about Sidney's behavior. I'm curious if it changes when the defense comes up, because they're going to claim that Sidney Powell had a schizophrenic break. Now, I could be wrong on this, folks, but to my knowledge, women might develop schizophrenia in their 20s to 30s. Men might develop it like a bit sooner, I think it is. But it's not just a break from reality like psychosis. Schizophrenia is schizophrenia. It's a very, very, very serious disorder. There's a lot of kind of physical things you can see in people, the way that they speak and different things like that. So if you are familiar with like schizophrenia, if you've been around like a friend or family member that has it, you would know better than me. Look at how Sidney's acting through this, and you tell me if you think that's applicable. And also, let's take a look when the defense comes up, if she changes the way she acts to make it fit that narrative a little bit more. I'm curious, but we'll see.
Voice calls the University of Mount Union. She talks to Mount Union, but she leaves a voicemail or a message with the secretary of the dean of students. John Frazier and Michelle Gaffney, they're still in a meeting. They cannot talk to Brenda at this time.
So Brenda called the school.
But John Frazier and Miss Gaffney, they call back as soon as they're available. And they call Brenda back. Brenda answers the phone. Brenda introduces herself. And John Frazier and Michelle Gaffney, they introduce themselves as well. Hi, Brenda. This is Mount Union University returning the call.
Aha. Xylophone said, is her dad there at the trial? Yes, her father is there. He also testified. We might be going late tonight, folks, because we got to watch a little bit more. We'll watch some of her dad's testimony.
Brenda says, thank you so much for calling me back, but the phone call is interrupted. John Frazier and Michelle Gaffney at this time hear a thud, and they hear screams.
What?
And they hear thud after thud
What?
after thud.
Wait, what? On the voicemail? What? Hold on, everybody. True crime for ADHD. We have to go back. We're going back. We're going back.
She works at Children's.
Hold on.
Where she works as a child life specialist.
I need clarity.
She works with children and families of those dealing with health issues. She guides them through the health process. And Brenda leaves work to return home to help with the Mount Union enrollment issues.
Brenda leaves
And at
home.
She meets Miss Powell, Sidney Powell.
She comes home and Sidney's there.
We know that around 12 to 12:15, Miss Brenda Powell calls the University of Mount Union.
Mom calls the school when she gets home.
talks
She
to
sees
Mount
her daughter
Union, but
first.
She leaves a voicemail or a message with the secretary of the dean of students. John Frazier and Michelle Gaffney, they're still in a meeting. They cannot talk to Brenda at this time. But John Frazier and Miss Gaffney, they call back as soon as they're available.
They called back.
And they call Brenda back.
Okay.
Brenda answers the phone. Brenda introduces herself.
Brenda, oh my God.
And John Frazier and Michelle Gaffney, they introduce themselves as well.
Oh my God, this is the...
Hi, Brenda. This is Mount Union University returning your call. Brenda says, thank you so much for calling me back.
Ooh.
But the phone call is interrupted.
No way.
John Frazier and Michelle Gaffney at this time hear a thud. And they hear screams.
No.
And they hear thud after thud after thud. They're still on the phone. They're trying to find out what's going on, but they can't get a response.
No.
And the phone call hangs up. John Frazier and Miss Gaffney, they start to call back. They're concerned. They call back once, there's no answer.
No.
They call back twice, there's still no answer. And on the third call back, Brenda's phone picks up.
Oh my God.
Yes, this is Brenda.
Oh my God.
Now, Mr. Frazier, Miss Gaffney, they've met Sydney multiple times.
I'm
trying to address her enrollment issues. They know who Miss Powell is.
Oh my God.
And when that phone answers and the person on the other line announces herself as Brenda, John Frazier knows
that it's Sydney
Powell on the phone.
Ooh.
And he says, Sydney, I know this is you.
No.
And the phone is hung up again.
No.
Now, Mount Union's concerns are heightened.
After killing her mother, Sydney Powell wanted to now lie to the people on the other end and pretend to be her mom. This is a lot. I don't like to use this word. This is chilling. I hate saying that word. It just sounds so corny. It really is though. I don't know how you feel right now. I feel not good. Not good. I feel the stress of all of that in that room.
They decide that it might be best that they contact the police. Now, being in Alliance, Ohio, they were concerned about calling 911 and about where that would be directed to. So they Googled the best number for the Akron Police Department, and they reached Sergeant Null.
This is unreal.
Sergeant Null answered the phone. He learned that Mount Union's concerns were about the Powell address. He heard about the screams. He heard about the thuds. And Sergeant Null at that time decided it would be best to dispatch the Akron Police Department through the radio.
To me, sorry, we're going off into BOZE assumption land. Listen, if you're watching my channel, there's a lot of YouTube channels that are like, here's the news, here's the objective facts, okay? If you're watching me, maybe you like my opinions, maybe you like disagreeing with my opinions, maybe you like hearing them and coming to your own conclusions. I love all of that. Part of my job is to give you some of my opinions. I've watched a lot of true crime cases, okay? In my opinion, to me, this doesn't sound like schizophrenia. It doesn't sound like a psychosis. I was looking into the Austin Harif case a few weeks ago, which was a psychosis, maybe it was mushrooms, something like that. They couldn't test for psilocybin towards the end of it, but he did go into some type of psychosis. And a lot of times, but this is not always true. It's not always true. But sometimes a person in psychosis before they kill, which does not happen often, there's a rant. There's a something before, they're going off about something, or there's a look, or there's some kind of actions in the days leading up to it, right? Also, once again, they're not even saying psychosis. They're saying schizophrenia, a momentary schizophrenic break. I'm sorry, what? To me, this sounds like all of the stress, all of the anxiety of everything was building up in Sydney Powell. And every time it got closer to her lies being uncovered, there's the fear, there's the anxiety. She can't take it. I can't let this happen. I can't let this happen. I can't let this happen. And the minute that they called back and her mom was going to find out everything, she had to end it by any means necessary. It was like an explosion of anxiety. It was an explosion of rage, maybe even an anger at herself. But it has to stop. It must end. It must stop. This can't happen. I have to stop it. I have to stop it by any means necessary. That makes a little more sense to me than, there's just a little schizophrenic break real quick. And that you have to be held accountable for it. Yes, it was the only way out for her. The anger, desperation, fear. This is a lot of intense emotions compounding into one. I can't even take the stress of it all. But here's the crazy thing. Sydney let all of this anger and fear and desperation pile up herself. She made it worse day over day. Man, everyone, take a deep breath. This is a crazy case.
Yep. I heard about the screams. He heard about the thuds. And Sergeant Null at that time decided it would be best to dispatch the Akron Police Department through the radio for a welfare check at the Powell's household. And in doing so, the Akron Police would respond to try to figure out what might be going on at the Powell household. Now, before they arrive, as the radio dispatch is going out, Detective Kenneth Deese hears the radio call out. Now, Detective Deese has been with the Akron Police Department for a long time, but he's also very good friends with the Powell family. He knows Stephen, Brenda, Sydney, their son. He knows everybody, and he knows that address. So he's concerned immediately. His friends, something's wrong. So he calls Stephen Powell. Stephen, the police are going to your house. Is everything okay? This is new to Mr. Powell. All he can say is, everything's fine. Sydney and Brenda are home. And Stephen hangs up with Detective Deese, and he calls Brenda. There's no answer. And he calls Sydney. There's no answer. But Sydney calls back.
Oh my God.
And when Sydney calls back, Stephen asks, hey, what's going on? She says, Dad, nothing. Mom's on the phone with Mountain View.
What the? You know what?
Reality.
I think that the reason they came up with the schizophrenia defense is because this is crazy and most people would not do this.
Brenda is laying in her bedroom. She's on her back. And she's suffering from severe blunt force trauma and severe sharp wound trauma. She's bleeding out. Brenda is dying.
Oh my God.
Mr. Powell tells Sydney, well, Sydney, the police are on their way. And this is when Sydney, for the first time, she becomes hysterical. Dad, somebody broke in. Somebody broke in. There was a break-in. We heard glass break. And the phone call is terminated.
Lying all the... I don't know much about this, but I know some of you, I know some of y'all that are really into psychology, you would know. Is she a pathological liar? Is there a chance that she lies about lots of other things in her day-to-day life and that just got applied to this massive, brutal anxiety? I don't know much about pathological liars at all. I leave it, man, there's a lot for the commenters today, okay? We got Twitch chat weighing in right here. There's a lot for commenters. Big day for commenters.
Officer Leggett, and there was a break-in. We heard glass break. And the phone call is terminated. Now, the Akron Police Department arrives. Officer Legacy, Officer Jackson. You're going to hear from both of them.
Wow.
They arrived to the Powell address on Scudder Drive in Akron, Ohio. Officer Legacy is first to respond.
Woo.
Officer Legacy knocks on the door. There's no response, but he starts to hear screaming from the door. He's very concerned. Officer Legacy runs around the back of the house to try to find out what's going on, while Officer Jackson arrives and is finally able to get through the front door because Miss Powell finally opens it amongst the screams. And Miss Powell is met by Officer Legacy and Officer Jackson. She's hysterical. She's scared. She's erratic with trying to direct their attention. And she's telling them immediately, there was a break-in, somebody broke in, Mom's down, there's blood. Mom told me to get out. She's trying to tell the cops that there was a break-in. Officer Legacy goes to the back room where he finds Brenda on the ground lying on her back. Unfortunately, Brenda, at the time when he got to her, he recognized that she was not surviving, that Brenda was dying.
Another big red flag for me is Sydney immediately trying to make excuses for what happened and trying to lie in the same way that she lied when she was perfectly sane talking about college. If you guys remember the Vince Lee case, the Greyhound bus attack, Vince was truly, genuinely an undiagnosed schizophrenic, and it was getting worse and worse and worse. I think he was either in his late 30s or his 40s. He had severe schizophrenia. It was diagnosed. He was on medication for a while. He got off of the medication, and then things got a lot worse. Well, when he was sitting next to Tim on the bus, he had been having a lot of delusions about people, and he was carrying around a machete with him, and he, without saying anything at all, he took out the machete and he started to cut his head off, and it mortified everybody on the bus. And afterwards, when Vince was arrested, he didn't really say anything. He didn't try to blame someone else. Sure, everyone saw it, but he didn't exhibit any type of behavior of even knowing what he did was wrong or caring or trying to justify. So what I find interesting is that they're claiming Sydney was schizophrenic, but she's justifying like a pathological liar afterwards. It's very strategic, very, very strategic, Vince Lee was not so strategic.
Next to Brenda, Officer Legacy recognized a cast iron frying pan and a kitchen steak knife.
Oh my God.
Through the investigation, it would later be determined that the blunt force wounds came from the cast iron frying pan and the sharp cutting wounds, stabbing wounds came from the steak knife. Now at the time, Officer Jackson, in hopes to help Sydney calm down, he still doesn't know what's going on. Sydney's covered in blood. He doesn't know if there was a break-in, he doesn't know if she's hurt. He escorts her out of the house where she continues to disclose there was a break-in, we heard glass break, Mom told me to get out. At this time, Stephen Powell is beyond concern.
She beat her mother with a cast iron pan, stabbed her with a knife from the kitchen, and as she is covered in her mother's blood, she tells officers that somebody broke in. She heard glass, and she didn't know what it was, and that's it. That's it. It wasn't her. She didn't do it.
The type of call that you can't imagine getting, and he rushes home. And as a dad, he goes right to Miss Powell. He's concerned. She tells her dad at this time, Dad, there was a break-in. There's so much blood. Mom told me to get out. Now, Sydney is covered in blood. That blood is Brenda Powell's blood. And there was a break in the glass. The back window was shattered. But that back window was shattered by Miss Sydney Powell, staging the break-in.
Wow.
There's blood found by this broken glass. That blood is...
Funny thing about this is when people try to stage a break-in, a lot of times they break the glass from the inside of the house rather than going outside and breaking the glass because they're in such a panic and she's covered in f***ing blood. Imagine Sydney Powell running outside and trying to break the glass from the outside. The investigators can immediately tell that the break came from the inside of the house.
Brenda Powell's blood that was on Sydney when she broke the glass. And Miss Powell does have cuts. She is injured. And that's from the glass itself when she broke it. Now, you, the jury, I will tell you this, that Miss Powell would later undergo a series, extensive interviews with psychologists and psychiatrists, doctor's appointments after doctor's appointments. Initially, she would disclose to doctors that...
Wait, I don't want to point this out because a lot of people in chat are saying this. Somebody else said, for me, I believe that she isn't fake crying. She cries in certain moments of the statements when they talk about her parents. I don't feel bad for her, but I can tell she regrets it and knows that it should have never happened. I personally agree with that. I think that she is genuinely crying, which we rarely see in court cases. Sometimes people try to put on a sad face, but there are no tears. She has truly been crying through this entire statement. And I believe that it's real because this is the first time that Sydney has really had to face reality. She faces it in interrogation rooms, but they're nice to her because they want to get the whole story out. They might push a little bit hard. In the interrogation room, they might show her photos of her mom at the crime scene to try to get something out of her. But those images are so intense that some people that are living in this world of delusion can look at those and say, that's not real. That didn't happen. I saw my mom and she was happy the last time I saw her. And you know what? I didn't do that. That's not real. They can get through that. But in this courtroom, when he is sucking you into the story and telling you every single piece, bit by beat, and describing the anxiety, Sydney cannot avoid this. And this is a moment she has to face reality. I think her tears are real. That's me personally.
They break in, that she was in the basement when they heard a glass break. And then later she blacked out. All she could remember is waking up with a knife in her mom's throat and that she was trying to stop the bleeding.
Oh my God, no.
She tells
You tried to cover it up after that?
when she's initially met with them. Now she continues to seek care, she continues to go to the doctors, and she continues to tell them that she blacked out from when she was in the basement and she cannot remember what happened. Now you, the jury, are going to be asked to make a decision on a few factors in this case. And you're going to hear from a lot of witnesses. You're going to hear both from the state.
I believe we can move on. There's still some time left in that statement, but it's mostly him explaining to the jury. Here we go, guys. Let's move on to the defense's opening statement. This one is a bit longer, And he's really going to try to justify his case here. Sometimes, just a heads up, we don't always listen to the full criminal defense statement because I sometimes cannot stand to hear somebody lie like this. It's also pretty up to people that like really have schizophrenia. Like, some people are watching this and they're like, really? Yeah. You think you know? Let's see what they got. Let's see.
I think what you're going to experience is this. I think about 90% of the state's case, their evidence and their witnesses is going to be focused on what happened. What happened on March 3rd, 2020, inside the Scudder home of the Powells. And I think you're also going to see that 90% of the defense case is going to be focused on what Mr. McAleese, I think, has correctly identified as the sole core question in this case, and that is why? Why? Why did this happen? What happened is not in dispute. Sidney Powell caused the injuries that led to her mother's death. Why is the question? So to help understand why, I think it's important for you to meet the Powell family.
Oh.
And prior to March of 2020, they were the all-American family.
Okay.
Brenda Powell was 50 years old. She was working as a child life specialist at Akron Children's Hospital. She works in the Pediatric Oncology Center. Brenda's job was to take children who are suffering from cancer through the most difficult journey that a child could ever go through. And she also took that journey with the parents of the children who were diagnosed with cancer.
Mm-hmm.
When kids were going through chemo and losing their hair, Brenda was there. When parents were struggling with what to do with this grief, Brenda was there.
Is it just me, or is he describing that she was a caretaker for sick and dying children, but almost in the most cold way possible? Like, it's like he's saying it, but I don't feel the impact of what Brenda's job was. That's so weird. How do you do that?
And Brenda has had a huge, enormous impact on our community.
Oh my God.
She organized things like a prom to remember, so these kids who were suffering from cancer would have some sense of normalcy in their life. She took them bowling, and they loved her, and she loved them, and she was like a second mom to them. That's the kind of skill set Brenda Powell had. You're going to meet and hear
Brenda's
about
the mom,
and hear
yes.
from Stephen Powell. Stephen Powell is Brenda's husband, Sydney's father. Sydney, the entire time she was at St. V, the lowest grade she ever got was a B. She graduated with a 3.8 GPA and scored a 27 on her ACT. I have to tell you, I only got a 23, so that's kind of impressive. Mm-hmm. She was an excellent student. And not only was she an excellent student and on the honor roll every semester at St. V, she was a good person. Ms. Milligan will talk to you about, I saw something in Sydney that I wanted other people to emulate. So we went on a religious retreat together, and Ms. Milligan took Sydney and made her a mentor for other students to look up to and emulate at the time of the offense. Here in Summit County, we have a doctor named Dr. Wood and psychodiagnostic. They work with the court system here, and they do competency and sanity evaluations. Dr. Swales does that in Cuyahoga County. Severe mental disease, that was schizophrenia.
Sorry. Hold on. I'm just not. I'm going to slow it down here because I think he might be getting to the...
Insanity evaluations. Dr. Swales does that in Cuyahoga County. You will hear that Dr. Swales first started seeing Sydney in January of 2021. He spent 7 hours with her the first time talking, testing. He spent 8 hours with Sydney the second time he met with her in early January 2021. He tested her again just this last July, July 23rd, and spent another 7 hours with her. He will tell you about the tests that he knows that are recognized in his profession to make determinations to answer the why. And he's going to talk to you about his conclusion, which is, again, at the time of the offense, Sydney Powell was suffering from a severe mental disease, that was schizophrenia. And that severe mental disease prevented her from knowing the wrongfulness of her conduct.
What kind of quack. Does anyone know what my problem with this statement is about to be? It's that they say, at the time of the offense, Sidney Powell was suffering from a severe mental disease that was schizophrenia. Schizophrenic people can have like a big like schizophrenic attack where things are getting a lot heightened or like a lot worse or something. But you don't just have schizophrenia at the time of an offense. Man, he would be better off here saying some kind of anxiety-induced psychosis. Schizophrenia? Like, am I tripping on this? I need some backup. Any schizophrenics, any friends or family of schizophrenics? Like, am I fucking tripping over this? Yes, like catching a cold and then it's over. That's not how this... Oh my God. Did he not understand the papers?
Was suffering from a severe mental disease that was schizophrenia. And that severe mental disease prevented her from knowing the wrongfulness of her conduct.
This is some legal jargon. That is what it is. It is basically not guilty, reason of insanity, has this disease during time of the offense, and prevented them from knowing wrong or right. No way.
You're going to hear finally from Dr. Robin Belcher Timmy. Dr. Timmy's board certified in forensic psychology in Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, and Ohio. He works now at the Delaware Department of Corrections to help the individuals there.
Also, somebody pointed this out in chat. Like earlier, I referenced a case, and the reason I was able to reference this case so quickly of somebody that did have schizophrenia and there was a crime committed was because it's so rare. It is so rare. Like most of the time, people that are schizophrenic, they just kind of like keep to themselves. Like they're doing their own thing. There's not a lot of you. Like I said, I think somebody can statistically look into this, but I personally believe that there are probably more like violent attacks that might come from like a severe psychosis, maybe some kind of drug-induced psychosis, than people with schizophrenia. Like it's so rare. It's so.
Make programming for violent criminal offenders.
Oh my God.
That's part of his job.
Like it's a very difficult disease, but it's not.
He's familiar with at-risk factors for youth. He did multiple testings with Sidney over multiple days, and he will tell you that Sidney at the time of the offense was suffering from schizophrenia, and that schizophrenia prevented her from knowing the wrongfulness of her conduct. As Mr. McAlee said, the judge's role is to give you the law. So I know no one on the prosecution side, and certainly not me, would ever intentionally mislead you about the law. If we say something that's different than what ultimately the judge says, listen to the judge. That's her job. But what I believe she's going to tell you about insanity is this. The plea of not guilty by reason of insanity raises the issue of insanity of the defendant at the time of the commission of the act. To establish the defense of insanity, the defendant must prove, by the greater weight of the evidence, that at the time of the offense, she did not know, as a result of a severe mental disease, the wrongfulness of her act. That's the law.
We got to get to some testimonies. I need some testimonies because his defense is basically, I have some experts. They are experts, and these experts tested her several times, and she had severe schizophrenia during the murder. And here's the definition of not guilty by insanity. So it's your job, jurors, to get it right. And let's talk to some experts. Some people had a lot of questions about her father. So there's about 3 testimonies that I really want to look into. The ones that I currently have pulled up are Sidney's dad, the witness that was on the phone from college that heard the murder, and one of Sidney Powell's teachers that testifies to her character.
You know who I am, one of the prosecutors on this case, right?
I do.
Okay, and Mr. Powell, I'm not even going to sit here and pretend to know how difficult this must be for you. I understand you're in the incredibly unfortunate position of being a victim in this case, but also being a fact witness. I promise to treat you with dignity and respect. If there's any question that you don't understand, please let me know. If you need Sidney at St. B's, for short, was in high school, was a great student, correct?
Correct.
Got great grades.
Okay, well, I think they moved the monitor in a minute.
All accounts, Sidney at St. B's, for short, was in high school, was a great student, correct?
Correct.
Got great grades,
Yes.
and she also had some extracurricular activities during high school, is that right?
She played some sports, yes.
Okay, can you please tell the jury what those were?
She played soccer and 1 year lacrosse.
Okay, did she do any other extracurricular activities at St. V?
Not that I can recall.
Okay, and she actually graduated with a pretty high grade point average, didn't she?
Yes,
Okay, and I'm sure that made you very proud.
it did.
And forgive me, I don't know. Was Sydney one of? I'm sorry. Let me ask you this way. Mr. Malarczyk said that you have an associate's degree.
I do.
Okay. And did Brenda have any degrees?
She had a bachelor's degree in child
bachelor's degree.
and early development, child development.
Early childhood development.
Yes.
Okay. So when it came time,
Oof.
as a lot of parents, get there when their kids are juniors and seniors. It came time to discussion for college. Please tell the jury how that conversation went, how you decided that, or Sydney decided she was going to go to Mount Union. Can you just tell the jury about that, please?
We went on
Sounds
a couple
like a different person.
College campus tours. We went down to Kentucky and Bowling Green and Mount Union, but I think we both decided that Mount Union was a closer, and Sydney liked that it was a smaller school and still relatively close to home.
Did you visit the campus with Sydney?
We did.
Okay, and Brenda?
Correct.
And how much communication would you have with her, excuse me, I'll withdraw that. How much communication would you or Brenda have with Sydney while she was?
They're kind of establishing a baseline of how they decided she would go to Mount Union, how Brenda and Sydney's dad and Sydney all went to the campus together. They checked it out. I think that's pretty normal, and that's where they decided she was going to go. But I think another thing that so far is like, some people were asking like, well, the parents must have been really abusive. They must have been, really controlling. Obviously, we can't tell exactly what somebody's demeanor is during a testimony when, their child's about to go away for life, possibly, and their wife has been murdered. Their demeanor is going to be a bit different. But so far, this guy seems like a pretty normal dude. Like, I'm getting normal dude vibes.
The app that Mount Union had.
Yeah, they're like a portal, I think it's called.
A portal? Okay, and you would try to sign into that portal and it wouldn't let you in?
Correct.
Why were you trying to get into that portal?
Seeing, because the 529 plan didn't cover all the tuition for the year, so I had to make a personal check.
Okay.
So I had to see how much that was.
Huh.
Okay.
Oh.
And when you had difficulty logging onto that portal, what did you do?
Because they
I
deactivated
asked
her
Sydney
account.
what was going on about it.
Okay, and what did she say?
There was a mistake with Mount Union,
Okay.
and she'd look into it.
Okay, and at that point you had no reason not to trust what
Correct.
she's telling you.
Oh my God.
And to be fair, you always found her trustworthy.
Yes.
Fair to say?
Fair.
All right. And we all know this happened on March 3rd. Was that particular conversation about the portal and talking to Sydney and saying what's going on, was that a few days prior to March 3rd or the day before, if you know?
I don't recall how long
Okay.
it was before.
But just a few days before?
I don't recall how many days before, but it was before.
Okay.
Dude, her dad really strikes me as the type of guy that would not be able to log into the portal so that he could pay her tuition and say, Sydney, what's going on here with it? Why? I don't know why I can't log in. Can you check on this for me? And she'd be like, oh, Dad, yeah, there's a problem with the portal. And I'd be like, oh, okay. All right, well, love you, baby. Bye. Like, that's just what I'm getting, dude.
Before March 3rd, did you become aware?
Now, I could be wrong.
Like that
I'm just
portal
saying,
issue
that's
of
what
any
I'm getting.
other issues with Mount Union and Sydney's enrollment?
No.
Okay. So sorry, again, I know this may be difficult, but there are some things about March 3rd that we do need to talk about. So the morning of March 3rd, that was a Tuesday, correct?
Yes.
And you went to work like any other day, right?
Yes.
And please also tell the jury, where do you work?
Akron Steel Treating Company.
Okay, and your position there?
I'm Vice President of Quality.
And how long have you had that? Or how long have you worked for that company?
About 28 years or so.
And so that morning, what was the first issue that came up with Sydney and Mount Union
Okay.
that you recall?
I believe Mount Union called me. They called me, and the conversation was that Sydney wasn't enrolled anymore. And then I asked for how long, and they said, you have to ask her.
Okay.
Oh, yeah,
And
they
then-
said, yo, if your daughter's lying to you, we're out of this, my dude.
I'm sure that came as a shock to you.
Yes.
And again, they said you have to ask, I know it sounds cold, but they're saying you have to ask her because they can't give you any more information, right?
That was my assumption.
So when Mount Union tells you she's no longer enrolled, what did you do?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I don't remember the details of all that.
Okay. Did you call Sydney or try to reach out to her at all?
I don't think I did. I don't know.
Okay.
Oh, he didn't confront her right away and say, what, why'd you lie to me? What is this? That makes a little more sense why he left his phone at work when he went to go check up on her, because he didn't have any reason to not trust his daughter before, but his daughter was clearly lying to him, tracking him, and trying to outsmart him. So he had to outsmart her to catch her at the house. And it sucks when I've been pushed to that point before, when somebody's lying or manipulating me to the point that I have to do some kind of evasive maneuver to finally catch them. It's very hard to catch these people. Because originally I felt a little sketched out that the dad did that, but that little part, it makes a little more sense for me personally.
Now, at some point that morning, and I think we may have already heard this, I don't know if we have, but you actually went home and spoke to Sydney, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. What prompted you to go home, to leave work and go home?
Because I saw on the app she was home, which I thought was a little bit early. The
Okay.
360 life.
The 360 app showed that she was home?
Yes.
If someone on that app comes home, do you get like a little buzz or notification on your phone?
If it's set up, you can.
Okay. So did you just happen to see that on the 360 app, or did it give you like a
I
notification?
might have got a notification. I don't recall.
Okay. So you get a notification that Sydney's at home, correct?
Yes.
And when you see that, you go home,
Correct.
right? And why did you go home?
See why she was home?
Okay. Did you have any concern for her at that time?
Just because Mount Union said she wasn't enrolled, but no. I was just going to go home and see why she was home so early. And
Oh my God.
Okay. And did you take your phone with you when you went home?
no.
And why not?
I just left it at work so the 360 app wouldn't show me coming home.
Okay.
Honest?
Did you not want Sydney to be able to see that you were coming home?
I would imagine that was my intent.
Okay. So, I'm sorry, your place of employment, how far is it from your home?
15 minutes,
Okay.
maybe.
What was, when she told you this, what was your response?
When she said that she was no longer enrolled.
That we would work it out.
Okay. Do you remember telling her, and I know you had a conversation with the police too, do you remember telling her that, you can't run away from your problems, you have to face them?
I said we'd go through, let's get through this semester, and if you needed to take the summer off or we would work through it.
Reminder, Sydney told her dad that it wasn't that she wasn't enrolled anymore. It was that she hadn't been going to Mount Union lately because she wasn't sure if it was the right school for her and she didn't know what to do. So her dad's response is, well, we'll figure it out. Here's some solutions.
She said, all her friends have their shit together and she doesn't, and I told her, no, that's not true.
She said she didn't, Sydney said, I don't have my shit together, but my friends do?
Yeah. She didn't know what she wanted to do, it sounded like.
Sure. Do you remember telling her, let's call the school back, get reinstated, something along those lines?
I think I said, let's call your mother.
I'm sorry.
I think I said, let's call your mother.
Okay, and why did you say that?
Brenda was better at things like that.
He didn't know what to
than
do.
me.
He leaned on her for this stuff.
And do you mean by dealing with Sydney or the college or both?
Probably both.
We're going to look at some of the testimony of the woman that was on the call when she heard Brenda Powell's murder. But I thought it was important for you guys to see a little bit of the character of Sidney Powell's father.
And you mentioned that once a student is suspended, they wouldn't be allowed back into the dorms. Can you explain the process of who's allowed in the dorms and who's allowed to use Mount Union's facilities as a student?
So to live on campus, you have to be enrolled as a full-time student.
Makes sense?
And that would be the
Yeah,
same
she
for
said, what
if
else do you
wanted to
want?
use Mount Union's facilities,
The
workout
recreation
room.
facilities, sure, yes, absolutely.
So it's
In
only for
general.
enrolled students.
Yes,
Dorms are for full-time enrolled students.
right.
Okay. And part of that suspension, that student would lose access to all of those availabilities.
Yes.
Okay. Now, would your office address issues if somebody was having concerns with the suspension's a little bit overwhelming or they're not sure what the next step is? Would they have access to try to understand that through you?
Absolutely. Either the student affairs or the academic affairs office, either one.
Okay, multiple.
The letters would have directed them to the academic affairs office more than likely
Okay.
to understand the suspension and what to do to get back in. The housing piece would have
Would've been
through
non-negotiable.
An office in student affairs.
You're not
And
in
Ms.
school
Gaffney, I'm
full-time,
going to draw
you
your
can't stay
attention
at the
to
dorms.
December of 2019.
Oh, no.
In your position, did you ever come across a Miss Sidney Powell?
Did I ever come across what? I'm
A
sorry.
Miss Sidney Powell?
In December?
Or let me ask you this. If a student were to be suspended going into the spring, so January of the next year, would they be provided notice December of the year prior?
No.
When are they provided notice?
It would have, by letter in December, they would have
In
been
December.
notified.
That's
But not
exactly it.
in person.
Not through you?
Yeah,
just through,
not through
okay.
me.
So I'm going to mark and present to you what's going to be marked as State's Exhibit. We're on 3.
Also, one quick thing that I want to point out is the prosecutor did a great job of painting how Sydney's lies built up into her stress and anxiety. But she maintained pretty good grades all through high school leading up into her early years in college. Sydney was also under an extreme amount of academic pressure. Now, clearly, she was smart enough to, do all the academics, do all the classes, even as they escalated in difficulty. But there was a point where she didn't, want to do it further or something. And I think that happens a lot in people in academics that burn out and they can't stop. Like if I burn out, I'm like, all right, guys, I'll see you in 2 weeks. People in college, they can't just leave. And it can be incredibly stressful, especially for really, really stressful programs. But can I please remind you guys, especially as job markets change, my God, I love college people. I love y'all. I love y'all so much. Because y'all motherfuckers got discipline. I don't care if you are skating through college with C's and D's. You're doing better than me, sister, okay? I was struggling in college. Whenever somebody applies to work with me and they got like a bachelor's or a master's, I'm like, bring it in, baby. You got discipline. You got it. And that's one thing that I find very, very fascinating. Like I work with people that don't have degrees and people that do have degrees. And both of these types of people work very differently and they both really need each other. The people with degrees, they are organized. They are dedicated. They meet deadlines. They get it done. It is amazing. And then these guys over here, they're usually pretty smart and they're like creative. But they float off and go all over the place without these people, okay? You need the degree people. You guys are wonderful. So don't forget, if you are going through a lot of academic pressure, the discipline, the organizational skills, the deadlines, that stuff that you guys have, the degree part, it will all be over soon. The academic pressure will all be over soon. And the way that it translates into the work world is really, really, really beautiful. Now, whether you're a degree person or a non-degree person, both are very, very useful and both have different strengths outside of just the knowledge past the degrees. But the discipline that the academic people have, I applaud you. I do. Yeah, it's something else. It's something else. Y'all are machines. And like you get that through all the pressure of the academics over time.
Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Thank you. And Ms. Gaffney, if you can take a look at that and let me know if you recognize what it is.
Yes.
Okay, what is that document?
This would be the letter. The letter indicating that Sydney was suspended.
Okay, so that's a suspension letter. That's the letter that's sent to students?
Yes.
Okay. And that directs them on who to contact if they want to appeal or to address what's going on?
Yes.
Okay. And Ms. Gaffney, who is that letter specifically to?
This is to Sydney.
And that's Sydney?
Sydney Powell.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and take that from you.
Man, she did not have the resilience of an academic. But y'all get into the workforce, you be like, move out of the way, non-degree people. I got this. y'all said deadline, I'm on it.
And Ms. Gaffney
Sydney
here
ain't
received
have
the
it.
University of Mount Union identifier.
Maybe she needed a little break, but she
Yes.
didn't have it.
Okay. And then there's an explanation as to why the suspension is occurring, correct?
Yeah.
That first paragraph?
Yes.
Okay. And the bottom of that first paragraph, it specifically states what semester that student will be suspended from, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And for Ms. Powell, which semester was her suspension going to start in?
So it would have started in January of 2020.
Okay. And is that when Mount Union starts their spring semester?
Dude.
Yes.
Somebody said, wait, sorry, I was taking a nap. Is the girl crying the killer? Yeah, she is. She was 19 years old when she killed her mother. I gotta say, Sydney Powell really surprises me because, I talk all the time. What does a nice person look like? What does a killer person look like? But man, when I look at Sydney, she don't look like no killer. She looks like a girl that wants to watch The Bachelor on Monday nights with her fellow friends in college. That's exactly what she did. But she was also a killer.
Okay. And is that when Mount Union starts their spring semesters?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Gaffney, at some point did you yourself meet Sydney Powell?
I did.
Okay. I just want to ask you briefly, do you recognize Sydney Powell in the courtroom?
Yes.
Okay, can you point to what seat she's sitting in? Thank you, Attorney Malarczyk. Okay, Ms. Gaffney, how did you come aware of Ms. Powell?
I became aware of her when one of our staff members, who's the director of student involvement, had one of her student leaders, that was a sorority president, come to her and indicate that there was a student coming to sorority meetings who wasn't on our list of enrolled students for the semester.
She was still going to the sorority Delulu land. Word of advice, guys. If you're gonna live in Delulu land, sit at your computer or lay in bed and live in Delulu land there. Do not take it outside of your special place, okay? I get why people live in Delulu land because it's safe there, it's comfortable, you get to make the rules, nobody can hurt you, good time, fine, totally get it, love that, okay? Great. Keep it in your secret space. When Delulu land leaves your room, okay, and it poisons the air of others, everyone's gonna think you're crazy. Everyone's gonna think you're absolutely crazy. You cannot, guys, come on.
Sorority meetings who wasn't on our list of enrolled students for the semester. And the sororities have to turn in a roster each semester of who is there for collection of dues and all of the,
He said if I'm going down, everyone's going with
records
me.
that they have to keep, both for their
Into Delulu land.
university and their national chapter. And so they were questioning the fact that we had left off a student from the roster who was attending sorority meetings, and trying to clarify the mistake. And our director of student involvement knew that it was not a mistake. She should not be on the roster, that she was not in fact enrolled for the semester.
Okay, so it was a student body who came forward looking for Miss Powell's name on their sorority roster.
Oh my God. So the girls at Bachelor Night had figured it out. They had figured it out that she wasn't supposed to be there. How creepy would that be? That would be so creepy. That would be creepy.
To the residents.
Okay, so
Staff
she's
effort.
still there.
Move out.
She did not move out?
Right.
And they send
So what
staff
was the
over.
university's next step?
Okay. So they've confronted Sydney about this. They've spoken with her. They were familiar with her. and they said you need to go, and she still didn't move out. So these are the next steps.
She didn't move out,
She did not move out?
right?
Okay. So what was the university's next step after that second meeting?
So that following week, when she hadn't moved out, we again, this time sent staff over to the residence hall because we were aware she was there at the time. I think our director of security and director of student conduct went over and asked her to come over. And Dean Fraser and I met with Sydney again and said, you cannot be here any longer. You're not enrolled. And again said, why don't we call your parents? And she refused. She did not want us to. She absolutely did not want us to do that. We asked again, are you sure you told your parents? Like,
We know
we know this is difficult. We know how hard this can be. And she absolutely did not want us to call her parents.
And what happened after that third meeting?
She did then move
Okay,
the
was
rest
it
of her
that
belongings
day
out.
or soon after?
I believe it was that day.
Okay. So
Definitely by the next.
Okay, and Miss Powell then left campus.
Yes.
Okay. Were you aware of where Miss Powell went or where she was going to be staying?
Home. She said home.
Okay. She told you she'd be moving back home?
Yes.
Okay. Now, students, they're allowed to have friends over who aren't enrolled at Mount Union,
Yes.
correct? Okay, so if Sydney wanted to visit her old roommate or her friends or sorority sisters, she could do that freely. She just couldn't be living there on campus.
Yes.
Okay. And I want to draw your attention specifically to March 3rd of 2020.
So that was all during December. March 3rd in 2020 is when this happened.
Can you explain to me what was going on in the early morning of that day?
Oh my God, this is the day of the call.
So Dean Fraser and I had been in a meeting together elsewhere in the building where our offices are located. When we came back to the office, we had a phone message from Mrs. Powell.
Now, when you say
asking us to
phone
call.
message,
I'm
is that
getting
like a
nervous. I
voicemail,
didn't expect
or
this
how does that
case
work?
They had
to
spoken
like
to our administrative assistant.
spin me up
Okay.
like this.
And asked for a call, asked for someone to call them about their daughter,
Who's they?
Brenda Powell.
Brenda Powell. Okay.
So
And-
and our administrative assistant actually also said that the business office had called over with a question about that Mr. Powell had called about the bill
tuition.
Okay. Yeah.
So what did you and Mr. John Frazier do once you received that voice message?
So we were walking back together, and we still had some work to do from the meeting we left. And Dean Fraser said, "Why don't we just go to my office and make this call first?"
Okay.
So we went in his office and called the number on the phone message that we were given, and Dean Fraser was sitting at his desk, and I was sitting next to it.
Oh my God, they
He
had
dialed.
no idea what was about to happen.
The phone was answered.
I'm getting
and,
nervous.
Mrs. Powell answered.
You say Mrs. Powell. Is that Brenda who answered?
Brenda answered, yes.
And what did you tell Brenda at that time?
So Dean Fraser was speaking and simply said, Brenda, this is Dean Fraser. I'm sitting here with Michelle Gaffney, our associate dean of students. We're returning your call, and that's about as far as we got.
Did Brenda respond to that introduction at all?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
what did she say?
I think he asked, "Is this Brenda Powell?"
Oh, okay.
And she said yes, and then he identified himself.
I can't even speak.
And Miss Gaffney, what happened next?
There was a very large or a very loud sort of thud sound, like a pounding or a thud,
They later found out that was a cast iron pan.
or a very loud sort of thud sound, like a pounding or a thud, accompanied by a pretty loud scream. And the scream might have actually been first, and then the thud,
Okay.
as I think about it, and then
She can't even hear what she did. We've gotten this far into the courtroom. This bothers me because this is how we got into this situation. Sydney slacks off or whatever. She doesn't want to hear it. Sydney's not supposed to be here. She doesn't want to hear it. Sydney's not supposed to do this. Well, let me just make something up. Like, even now, she doesn't want to hear what she did. She constantly, this is a pattern of not liking to hear what she did because she can't handle it.
an expulsion. The other sound that I heard at that same time, or right after, was sort of an expulsion of air, like the air was knocked out of somebody.
Okay.
I'd always heard that expression of the air being knocked, having the wind knocked out of you, but I didn't. That's actually what it sounded like. And then several more repeated thuds.
Sorry, imagine being so much of a that you can't handle accountability, like at all. None. The mere threat of the accountability of your own actions, it builds up such an anxious force in you that you can't handle it. Bro, if you're dealing with that, because you know what, I bet you a lot of people do. You need to deal with that, bro, because not dealing with it, it's only gonna hurt you. Learning to deal with it, it's mostly gonna benefit you. You should be doing that for yourself. And I know that it hurts. If there's an emotion that you hate, whatever it could be. I hate guilt. I don't like guilt, or I don't like being embarrassed. That's a good one. I don't like being embarrassed. It just, whenever I would get embarrassed, I would push it away. I didn't want it to be real. I didn't want it to be happen. And now that I'm older, what I do now is I take that emotion that I don't like and I eat it. It's hard. I eat the embarrassment and I take a deep breath and I let it flow through me. I accept what I've done. I accept the emotion and I let it be. I let it be. And when you do that a couple times, you realize that the emotions that you're so terrified of, they're just emotions. They're not as bad as you thought they were. They're really not. Take it in, eat it, swallow it, and just let it pass through you. And it's going to be tough the first couple times. You take a few deep breaths if you hate accountability, because some of y'all do, and you know it. Oh, you know it. We have to deal with y'all when it happens. When you do something wrong, when you're imperfect, or you have to be critical of yourself, maybe you had a parent that was very hard on you, very critical on you, and now you can't handle any criticism, it's only going to benefit you. So eat the criticism, take a deep breath, and let it flow through you. You do it a couple times, you will feel so much better. Superpower!
I don't know how to describe the sound.
No, and that's okay. And you and Mr. Frazier could hear this from the other end of the phone.
It was on speakerphone, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you hear any communication during these thuds?
Just the screaming.
Oh my God.
And so we were both talking into the phone, saying, what's happening? Are you okay? Do you need help? What's going on?
Yeah, can you describe your mindset at this time?
I mean, it very definitely felt like someone was being attacked. And so we weren't getting an answer. I think at some point I said, if you can't respond, we're going to call the police if we don't hear if no one can tell us what's going on.
I wonder if they thought that it was Sydney attacking her at the moment.
The dean's has an administrative assistant right outside his door. So I said, well, I'm going to get Sydney's address. And he kept talking. And so,
Mr. Frazier?
Mr. Frazier, yeah, Dean Frazier. So I opened the door and told our admin, I said, I need Sydney Powell's address right away.
She wasn't supposed to be on campus. She was there. And before her mother could even hear what they were going to say, she killed her. Now, during the trial, we get our opening statements. We get our victim testimonies. We get our expert testimonies. We also get our closing statements. But, one, you already know the verdict. I already know the verdict. But I'm going to skip the closing statements. And let's see the moment that the verdict happened. This trial, this one shocked me, dude. This one really shocked me.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Julia Janae here joining Ted Rowlands, and we are covering this new information out of Ohio that there is a guilty verdict for Sydney Powell. All counts. This jury came back after 9.5 hours, Ted.
Yeah, they took their time over 3 days. And at the end of the day, though, as Shanley Pater pointed out with their mannerisms in the courtroom, they just didn't believe Sydney Powell was suffering from an acute mental breakdown when she murdered her mother in 2018. Let's start the hour by looking back. If you missed it, this is what happened when the verdict was read.
Verdict form number 1 as to count 1 reads, we, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled, sworn, and affirmed, do hereby find the defendant Sidney Powell guilty of the offense of murder as charged in count 1. The form goes on to say, and we do so render our verdict upon the concurrence of 12 members of said jury. Each of us said jurors concurring in said verdict signs their name hereto this 20th day of September 2023. Each juror has signed in ink next to his or her name. Verdict form number 2 reads, we, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled, sworn, and affirmed, do hereby find the defendant Sidney Powell guilty of the offense of murder as charged in count 2. And we do so render our verdict upon the concurrence of 12 members of said jury. Each of us said jurors concurring in said verdict signs their name hereto this 20th day of September 2023. Each juror has signed their name in ink next to their juror number.
I think the part that bothers me the most about this is that I couldn't even hear the schizophrenia defense. I couldn't even hear it, just the way that he phrased it. Sounded like we had a little paid expert on our hands, maybe. BOZE assumption land. BOZE assumption land. I think it really bothers me that they tried to, go down that route. You might have had me listen a little bit if you said some kind of massively anxious psychosis, but that was just ridiculous. That was offensive.
Verdict form number 3 reads, we, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled, sworn, and affirmed, do hereby find the defendant Sidney Powell guilty of the offense of felonious assault as charged in count 3. And it reads, and we do so render our verdict upon the concurrence of 12 members of said jury. Each of us said jurors concurring in said verdict signs their name hereto this 20th day of September 2023. Each juror has signed his or her name in ink next to their juror number. And finally, verdict form number 4 reads, we, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled, sworn, and affirmed, do hereby find the defendant Sidney Powell guilty of the offense of tampering with evidence as charged in count 4. Below that it says,
don't forget, afterwards she tried to break some windows and act like it was a break-in. Somebody, hey. It's been a while since I've talked about this one, just gotta add it in. Organized crime versus disorganized crime. This would have been a textbook disorganized crime, because in a disorganized crime, somebody grabs items that are like within the household. The burglar didn't bring in a gun or a knife or some rope or anything. This was not planned. These were objects found inside the home and somebody knew where to find them.
and we do so render our verdict upon the concurrence of 12 members of said jury. Each of us said jurors concurring in said verdict signs their name hereto this 20th day of September 2023, and each juror has signed in ink next to their juror number.
Yeah, this is evil Delulu, okay? Deluluers, denounce this. I was shocked when I first heard about that case. I was shocked to hear more about Sydney's background. I was shocked to hear the nature of the crime, how everything played out. It was unbelievable. It was almost as unbelievable as the strategy the defense team tried to use. Sidney Powell's sentencing is on September 28th. You already know what I'm gonna say. That's it.